So our speaker for now is Nicole Parker. She is a best-selling children's author and biblical counselor. She holds a master's degree in pastoral ministries from right here at Andrews University. She's the happily married wife of Dr. Alan Parker and is currently homeschooling their 4 children, the oldest of whom they just adopted from Ukraine in December. She is also an adjunct faculty member in the religion department at Southern Adventist University, where she currently teaches biblical counseling and sexuality in scripture. So please join me in welcoming Nicole Parker.
Hello. Hello. I'm so glad to be here with all of you today. Have you been blessed so far? This has just been fabulous. Such a blessing. Today we're talking about everybody's favorite topic, sexual abuse. It's kind of akin to cleaning up vomit on people's list of favorite things to do. Let's just talk about sexual abuse. It's awesome. I speak as someone who sees sex as one of the most powerful gifts that God has given to us in revealing his character. I believe that it shows mysterious things that we can't fully understand about the character of God, that multiple beings can be one because of love and mutual service to one another. And the more beautiful a gift is, the more dark it is when it's misused. So I see sex as an image of the character of God when properly used, and one of Satan's most powerful tools to destroy. When you look at cultures that have risen and fallen throughout history, the worst despicable, terrible things that happened tended to be laced with sexual misconduct, sexual abuse. Throughout history, when cultures fell, there was systemic sexual abuse going on within them. And I believe at the end of time, we should expect the same thing. So here we are, facing a broken image of God, and yet, when God restores, how beautiful it is. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. This is my wonderful family, my husband, Alan, and our 4 children. We have 3 teenagers, so y'all pray for a sister anytime. And our youngest is 12. And it's a lot of noise and a lot of fun, and it's fabulous. But this is what the devil told me I could never have. Hundreds of times, probably thousands of times throughout my childhood and youth, I thought I could never get married because I got sick every time my boyfriend tried to hold my hand. I could never have children because I felt so dark and cold and horrible inside. If I even saw somebody pick up a little girl, it was just too awful. I thought, how could I ever survive? I couldn't even handle having a daughter. So I knew I could never get married. I could never have children. I could never have what all my friends were going to have as their futures because my grandfather had sexually abused me up until he died when I was 10 years old. This was the man I loved and trusted the most in all the world. And he was fabulous 98% of the time. So thoughtful, made me stilts, hid an Easter egg in his mouth when we had an Easter egg hunt. He was lots of fun, sang me goofy songs. What you don't understand is that predators don't look like predators all the time. They look like people that are all around you right now. And we just can't tell. So nobody thought to warn me about sexual abuse, because my parents were sure I was safe. All I ever did was go to church, get babysat by my grandparents, and go to Adventist school. They don't know all the things that were happening to me, and I don't fault them for that. The problem is nobody ever talked to me, and that's why I talk. This is not a fun topic, but I speak because somebody needed to do this for me, and I want to do it for those who didn't get this training up until now, because we can be the change makers that stop this epidemic in our church and in our families. What is sexual abuse? I just want to cover that briefly. It is the infliction of sexual contact upon a person by forcible compulsion, or the engaging in sexual contact with a person who is below a specified age or who is incapable of giving consent because of age or mental or physical incapacity. That's kind of broad. And I could make it even broader and say anything that is misrepresenting the character of God is an abuse of sex. But I'm going to make it narrow for the purpose of what we're talking about here. Sexual abuse and harassment and assault take a wide range of manifestations. It can be inappropriate remarks or questions, like asking a girl, so what size bra do you wear? Well, when that's coming from the pastor, that's not okay. That's abuse. Showing pornography without consent, and by consent I include anybody who's too young to consent. Under the age of 18 is legally too young to consent to sexual acts. But children who are shown pornography, or parents who even leave it around carelessly so that children can access it, or leave it open on a computer or something like that, that can be abusive. Sextortion, this is a massive movement that's just starting, and there's some terrifying research out there showing what happens when people use sexualized images or sexual images that maybe were taken during consensual activity, or it could be pictures that somebody shot while you were changing at the gym. But sextortion is using those images to coerce or threaten victims. And they can even be falsely produced images. You can now make things that didn't actually happen, put this person's face on something else. And this is a rising problem that is massive among young people, especially largely because they sext so much with each other. Inappropriately exposing intimate parts of the victim or the abuser. We're not talking about a diaper change or a doctor's necessary examination, but inappropriate exposure. Sexualized touches or kisses without consent, age, or willingness. Molestation, incest, and rape. Now, many people don't understand that rape is not just the traditional interpretation we have of that. It can be penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. All of these constitute rape, any kind of penetration without consent. How much does sexual abuse happen? We don't really know. It's very hard to get accurate statistics because few people report, and many people are abused and don't classify it as abuse, particularly males. It's very hard for men to say, I was a victim. So if you ask a guy, so have you ever been a victim of sexual abuse? Chances are you'll get, no. Well, did anybody ever mess with you when you didn't want them to? Oh, yeah. But they didn't constitute abuse in the victim's mind. It's very hard to get accurate statistics, but here's what we know. The average child molester gets 50 to 150 victims before he's arrested, and he's so deeply addicted that he continues even after it becomes apparent that consequences could happen. And hardly any of those victims usually report. The Department of Justice estimates that on average there's one child molester per square mile in the United States. Stop and think about the town that you live in, and the miles and miles of fields and forests that you might have around there. And then think of the concentration within your neighborhood, within your community, within a square mile of your house. It's pretty chilling. We don't know how many abusers there are, and it's not like it's 1 out of every 5 guys just because it's 1 out of every 5 girls kind of thing. But 1 out of every 6 American women has experienced attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. Almost 15% were actually raped. About 1 in 33 American men has experienced attempted or completed rape. From 2009 to 2013, CPS, Child Protective Services, found strong evidence to substantiate claims that 63,000 children experienced sexual abuse. And to find strong evidence is not what happens every single time. So that excludes all the 4-year-olds who came and said, my uncle did this to me while we were at home alone today. That one isn't strong evidence. Of victims of rape and sexual assault under 18, 34% are under age 12, and 66% are ages 12 to 17. The Me Too movement has given us an idea of how prevalent this is. 19 million Me Too tweets have gone out, and that's broken the silence and brought healing to so many people, because millions of men and women have realized, I'm not alone. When we start grappling with the statistics and realize, oh wow, you mean 1/3 of the women in the room have been sexually violated or abused? It's not just me. I felt like I was the only one. Now, some people criticize Me Too and say, yeah, it's glamorizing victimization and making people think that they're victims when they aren't. Let me tell you, only a very sick person will claim to have been sexually abused or assaulted when they haven't been. It's not fun. It's not fun to have your credibility constantly questioned, because I know full well that standing up and saying, I have been sexually abused, reduces my credibility in the minds of many people. They'll go, oh, well, the moment that a sexual abuse or assault situation comes up, they say, well, let's not have her handle it because she probably will get too upset about it because, she went through abuse. This is what happens. People will be like, wow, it's so beautiful to hear your testimony. We love to see what God has done in your life. You're a whole, healed, happy, healthy person. And I'm like, yes, praise the Lord. But then when I come back to that same person and say, here's something that happened with one of your friends who has abused somebody. Well, let us handle it because you're biased by your experience. Beautiful. Let you, who has no research, no experience, no actual concept of what's going on here, but yeah, we'll let you handle it because I would be too permanently damaged by something that happened to me more than 30 years ago to be able to think well even now in this situation. This is what happens when people have been sexually abused. They are forever considered to be damaged goods in some people's minds. But we're not. And if you have been a survivor of sexual abuse or assault or harassment, just know God doesn't see you as damaged, and neither do those of us who have embraced his perspective on life. Many people say, yeah, it's out there. That's terrible that it's happening out there in the world, but not in my church. I'm so thankful that's not in my family. But in a classic study of adult women in the general population, Dr. Diana Russell found, and later research by Dr. Gail Wyatt and others confirmed, that rates of child sexual abuse are skyrocketingly high. 28% of Russell's sample of women had been molested. That's more than a fourth. I know you realize that. But think of that. 1 out of every 4 women you know had been molested under the age of 14. And 38% if you included all the way up to age 17. 38%. Stop and think for a moment. That's more than 1 in 3 of the women you know. How many kids are in your life? How many of you have at least 5 children in your life that you love? Nieces, nephews, cousins, kids that run up to you at church and say hi. Do we want to grapple with the 1 in 3 of these kids? These girls are likely to have been sexually abused or assaulted. And remember, this is physical contact offenses only. That's not exhibitionism. That's not nonviolent sexual contact between kids who are just curious about each other. But only 5% of this abuse had been reported to the authorities. And probably only a fraction of that 5% was actually followed up with any kind of charges, because the level of what's required to be considered to be strong evidence is so high that unless there's bleeding, you're not going to, frankly, very often have any charges. Now, I know 38% of women sounds really high, but in my experience growing up, it was higher than that. Most of the girls in my church were sexually abused. I remember counting every girl that I could think of who ever darkened the doorway of our church, and most of them had told me they were sexually abused. The only situation that was ever dealt with was one with 3 girls who came to our church with their father. They had a single father, and one of the girls reported finally to her school, not to anybody at our church. They were taken away. I never saw them again. That's the only one that actually came to anything. And I don't even know what happened with that father, whether he actually went to jail or not, because everybody was silent. Even when I reported to my mom, this guy in the church is sexually abusing this girl in the church, she said, oh, she makes stuff up. It's not a surprise that I didn't tell. It happens a lot. And I'm not just talking about one church. You may think my church is an anomaly. Go read Predators by Anna Salter. It'll chill your blood. But she talks about how astonishing it is that, everywhere she went, she just kept finding out that, wow, there are so many here, and there are so many in this town. And then all of her colleagues were like, I can't believe it. I've stumbled into a village where there's just a whole nest of sexual predators where I happen to work. Everywhere they went, there were so many, because there are so many cases, and nobody talks about it. On sleepovers, on mission trips, in dorms, I found consistently wherever I went in life, it was more than 50% of the girls had been sexually abused or assaulted before the age of 18. What are the effects of sexual abuse or assault? What does this do to us? Is it really such a big deal? Because there are people out there that are like, get over it. Come on. It's one thing that happened to you, 1 minute of your life. Do you really want to let that ruin your whole life? Look at me. I went through all kinds of things, and yet what does this do to us? Particularly when we try to suppress and pretend it didn't happen. We deal with depression or anxiety, flashbacks, post-traumatic stress disorder, self-hatred, self-harm, suicidal ideation, substance abuse, eating disorders, sleep disorders, marital and relational problems, sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies. This is not a fun list, but it's by no means exhaustive. This just scratches the surface of things that happen to people. However, I think personally that the worst effect of it all is that abuse lies to us about whether we are deeply loved and valued. Sexual abuse cuts to the core of who we are because we were created male and female. There's something about who we are that's touched on by sexuality. It's such a deep part of our identity that when we are sexually abused or assaulted, it can speak so deeply to whether we are loved or valued. Every human being has these two great cravings, love and worth. And these things are answered by creation and redemption. This is how much we're worth. But when we don't believe those things, we end up crushed by a need to find identity in something or someone. And abuse tells us very strong lies about whether we are loved or valued. If God is strong enough to protect me, why didn't he? If God loves me so much, why did he let this happen? These were the things that I grappled with and that made me nearly lose faith and made me nearly decide I didn't want to have a life anymore. But praise God, that's not the end of my story. And if you're struggling, that doesn't have to be the end of your story either. God is a God who gives beauty for ashes. In order to help victims heal, then, we must help restore their belief that they are loved and valued. People need to know that we are image bearers of a God who loves us. We have a purpose. We have worth. Even if you don't yet have the ability to connect with the God who seems to have betrayed you, you can identify the fact that you have worth. You are an image bearer. You, like every other person around you, is priceless. You and every person around you deserve to be loved. Sex should reflect the character of God, but it doesn't most of the time. Why does abuse flourish? Abusers weasel their way into positions of trust and responsibility. That's what they love to do because it's all about power, as we've talked about. Abusers want the power of God without the character of God. They want to have the same thing that Lucifer wanted to have. Ye shall be like the Most High. He wanted that power. And all sin and all abuse is characterized by the same thing, the thirst for power and the belief that I am entitled to it. If I believe that I am entitled to be over others, I can justify slavery, I can justify abuse, I can justify anything I want. The man who believes that he was placed by God higher than his wife can justify himself in doing anything he wants to her. People desperately want to believe they can tell who would abuse. This is one of the main reasons why abuse flourishes, because the well-meaning people around abusers prop them up instead of cutting down the things that lead them to foster their sins. Victims are often people with doubtful credibility. If I were a predator, that's who I would look for. And to predators, it's often a game of chess, looking for, when they come to church, they don't see, oh, look at these cute little kids. I just love watching little kids. They think, which one looks the most vulnerable? Which one doesn't have a father figure? Which one could I say, hey, can I take him out for ice cream? I'd love to buy him those basketball shoes he really wants. Why are they doing this? Everybody goes, wow, what a good man. He's always taking care of those kids in the church, the ones that need somebody. Now, I hate to say this even because those kids do need somebody to be like that for them. And that's a powerful way to image the character of God. But predators look for vulnerability because it's an opportunity to crush instead of to heal. Victims end up often coming from troubled backgrounds. They're often young or vulnerable, and they often quickly back down. An abuser loves to find somebody who has a reputation for lying, because when they come forward and they say, the principal took me in his office and he did this, everybody goes, yeah, we know you lie. Perfect. And perpetrator bias is strong. This is another whole topic. I could spend an hour telling you about perpetrator bias. We want to believe that we can tell who's dangerous. That's what Kathy Klages wanted to believe when 2 girls came forward to her about Larry Nassar sexually abusing them. This was back in 1997, before most of the victims that we have on record now were even born. They said, Larry is doing this to us. Kathy said, I've known Larry for years. He would never do anything inappropriate, because she was so sure, she knew. She was going to take that over the word of 2 girls who were telling him, no, this is what he's doing. And the next thing that one of them knew, when she saw Larry again, Larry said, I talked to Kathy. And she burst into tears and said, I'm so sorry, I misunderstood, I'm so sorry. The victim was apologizing to the abuser, and hundreds more were abused. We now know of over 500 victims who have come forward abused by Larry Nassar. We don't recognize these people as predators, though, because we think sex offenders are monsters, and surely we would recognize a monster, wouldn't we? Everybody, and I say this about myself too, everybody wants to live in a world where if they're hauling that guy away in handcuffs, we would say, I always knew there was something about him. I knew it. I knew it. We'd love to live in a world like that, but we don't. Some of us know it, and some of us think that we still live in that world, or try to live in that world. So when the guy from church gets accused, we go, no, he's come over to our house and had a barbecue in our backyard. He's so nice. I've seen how nice he is to his kids. He wouldn't hurt a fly. I saw how he treated that poor kitten. Blah, blah, whatever. We love to believe that we would recognize a person who is a monster. But we don't, and we can't. And perpetrators are so believable. They want to be believable. They love having a whole network of people they have groomed. If you read in the book Predators, you will find Anna Salter. She went to prisons and interviewed sexual predators and sex offenders and got their stories of how they would get victims. This one guy walking past a church, he said, I'd go in the church and I'd say, Pastor, I just got out of jail. It was just for some petty thing, a hot check or whatever. You can check my record. But as I was out here walking down the street, I was just praying that God would show me where to go. And I heard my favorite hymn coming from your church. Pastor, can I come and attend your church? You can check my record. And the pastor just melts into a warm puddle at the guy's feet. Oh, yes, come. And within a few months, he's in charge of the youth choir. Another guy said, I would mow lawns for old ladies. I would do anything I could because I knew if ever some kid came forward, I would have all these people in the church saying, we've known him since he was a little boy. He's the best. And I've seen this happen when one of my friends was being beaten to a pulp by her husband. And immediately when her son called 911, horrific 911 recording, the police came, they hauled the guy away, they got my friend to sign papers. The next morning, a whole pile of church members were down there at the prison, vouching for his character. Good man. Such a good man. The bottom line with this is that really dealing with sexual abuse is a living nightmare. And we don't want to embark on that nightmare unless we absolutely have to. So we do everything we can to believe that it was just something that this person got wrong. He didn't actually do it. She misunderstood. She told a lie. Because then we don't have to join the nightmare. Maybe it's just this person, this victim, who will have to live this nightmare alone because we don't want to go on that journey with them. How can we stop this from happening? How can we reduce children's chances of being assaulted? First of all, foster healthy self-worth through connected relationships. Children need to know that they're loved. We can't fix everything, but when a sexual abuser sees that we have close connections with children, they may cross those children off the list. So if they've got 10 options at church of these are the kids that look to me like they might be good victims, this one is a nice quiet kid, I bet they wouldn't tell, we help cross those kids off the list when we connect deeply with them. We also help hugely when we talk frequently and thoroughly about both abuse and healthy sexuality. My kids know they can ask me anything, and you wouldn't believe the embarrassing questions that they come up with. But we're committed to being completely honest with them. And ever since their earliest years, I've always talked with them about safe and unsafe touch. I've never once said to them, this guy is safe. Don't worry about him. Because I want them to trust their own perceptions. I don't want them to think that mommy is the one who figures out who's safe and who's not safe. Because what if I'm wrong someday? I want them to know I trust you to figure out based on what this person does to you. If this person touches you, it doesn't matter that mommy trusted them. You come and talk to me, and we'll deal with it. I remember talking to my son when he was really little in bed and saying, so, sweetie, just before you go to sleep, I just want to check with you. What would you do if a bad person came and touched your penis? And he said, I would tell you. I said, what if I wasn't there? Then I would tell the police, and they would get him. And I said, well, what if the police couldn't find him? Then God would get him. That's what I wanted you to know, sweetheart. That's it. We can't get them all, but God will. And that knowledge is what has been so incredibly healing to me. I don't have to worry about fixing it all. My job is not to fix all the evil and injustice in the world. My job is to do my best. I will stand on the right side in every situation to the best of my ability. And then whatever happens, happens. God is the one who fixes everything. And this is what this whole great controversy between Christ and Satan is about. Someday God is going to wrap it up, and he's going to make it like those movies that you watch that the impossible plot line is going, you're like, there's no way they can fix this in the next 10 minutes. And then they do. And it all works out at the end, right? That is the great plot of what's going on right now in this world. And I don't know how all these plot lines are going to come together, but I know this. At the end, he's going to fix it. And in that, I have confidence. All I have to do is make sure I'm on the right side in every situation. I don't have to fix it. I have to only do my best to fix it so that I am blameless. There's no blood on my hands. Talking frequently and thoroughly with your children about healthy sexuality doesn't mean just saying, now be sure if anybody ever does this to you. It also means fostering health. My husband used to laugh because I would say, who made your sweet little nose? Jesus. Who made your sweet little fingers? Jesus. Who made your sweet little penis? Jesus. Because I want them to know this is good. God made every part of you. There's no part of you that's dirty or shameful. Everything is good and beautiful in God's plan. Help your children and the children in your life and in your community, in your church, to understand safe and unsafe touch. But more than that, help them to understand that if anybody ever touches them in an unsafe way, they are not dirty. They are not defiled. I've always emphasized to my children, you cannot become dirty because somebody else did something. Sin is what makes you dirty. If you didn't sin, you're not dirty. They're the ones who are dirty. If we can help children to understand some of these basic concepts, we help them to be abuse-proof. Even if abuse happens to them, it will have a drastically diminished impact because they have faith that overall they're still pure and good and healthy. Monitor and educate thoroughly about safe and unsafe online activity. This is a massive problem right now. And parents didn't grow up in the world that these kids are growing up in now, so parents are often clueless. It's unbelievable to me the way that kids often are doing all kinds of things online, and the parents have no idea who they're communicating with, who they're talking to. My kids don't have that access to the internet. They're really bummed about that sometimes. But they also understand this is something I don't want. Even when my sons are really into Bible memorization, so they were into scripture typer on my phone. So I'd let them use my phone to do scripture typer. And they started talking in groups with some other kids. And wouldn't you know it, some sweet 13-year-old girl who's called God's Soccer Girl comes in there and says, somebody want to see my nudes? Come over here and look on this website. But thankfully, I have smart kids. They immediately brought it to me, Mommy, we've got to block this person and report them. Awesome. That's what I wanted. And I always tell them, it's not going to be something that you can't tell me if you ever see, when you ever see pornography, because I know in this world it's inevitable. If they live to 70, somewhere they're going to see it. I always just tell them, if you ever see something, turn off the computer, come to me, do anything you can, turn away. And if you watch it, tell me anyway. They need to know there is no defilement that can actually permanently defile you except your own sin And even that can be washed away by the blood of Christ. So there is nothing that sticks to you that the blood of Jesus can't remove. When a child knows that, they won't get caught in the spinning cycles of addiction over and over and over because they feel so bad. This is who they are now. Set up verified volunteers or a similar program in churches. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has the verified volunteers program, but it's something where you train people who are working with children, and you make sure that they don't have registered sex offenses. It'll still only scratch the surface at actually getting out the creepy people, but you'll educate the good people to watch for things that shouldn't be happening. How can we reduce adults' chances of being sexually assaulted? This is more complicated because we have to be careful not to make it sound like it's somebody's fault if they do get assaulted. We all know it's not a kid's fault. Well, I hope we all know it's not a kid's fault when somebody assaults them. But it's more complicated when we're older. Empowering victims. There's a great program that emphasizes assess, acknowledge, and act. It's been being tested out in some Canadian universities, and they found it reduced the number of sexual assaults of college women by 50%. Simple progress of going through several hours of training where they understand how to assess what are the dangers going on in this situation. How do you acknowledge to yourself instead of going, oh, come on, he's probably just doing that because whatever. Instead of dismissing things, assess them, acknowledge them, and when necessary, act, including self-defense and things like that. You can look that up in the New England Journal of Medicine. Instruct on basic prevention. It is not your fault when you get raped. But if you drank something or you swiped right and went out with somebody you didn't know and met them in an unfamiliar place and did something, there are things that you can say, I shouldn't have done that. But don't try to repent for being raped. You can repent for drinking when you shouldn't have been drinking. Don't repent for stuff that you didn't do. Educate on definitions and dynamics of abuse. Many people don't even realize they're being abused. I counseled with a girl who was in her 20s, and when I said, so were you raped or molested? She said, I don't know what those words are. Because she'd been raised in a super conservative environment where she wasn't allowed to think. And so when she was being systemically abused over and over for years, she had no words for it. They had their own names for what they were doing to her. Encourage and streamline the reporting process. Never underestimate the power of telling somebody, I will come with you to the police station. We can't make people report, except if there's a child involved, it may be illegal not to report. But when you've got a 25-year-old or a 40-year-old and she says, my husband is raping me, she may not know that that's a crime. She may not know that this isn't okay. It's not something that she should be subjecting herself to. But many people have never been told that. So you educate them. And don't blame or shame. Often when a person gets blamed or shamed for something that happened, whether it was legitimately their fault or not, the blaming and shaming escalates their sense that this is just who I am. And they go into free-for-all. They just go downhill. It snowballs for them because this is who I am. I'm dirty. Everybody knows I'm a bad boy or a bad girl. So there are a lot of things we can do to help victims, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, just some of the most important things that I found. Equip defenders. That's what we're doing right now. We are helping people to understand what abuse is, how it works, how to stop it, how to help heal. When we equip defenders, the higher up they are in positions of leadership and authority, the greater the potential they have for making a difference in the lives of thousands of children and adults who might be abused otherwise. Sometimes, as an abuse advocate, I end up feeling like I'm sitting on the side of a boat, kicking my feet, trying to turn the boat. It's frustrating. But there are people who can grab the steering wheel and turn the ship. And when we empower those people, and when they're equipped and they understand what they're doing, they can make a tremendous difference. However, never underestimate the difference that you make. Remember the starfish. You make a difference to that one. Listening empathetically, caring, will be transformative in the lives of the people that you love. And then, finally, educate potential abusers about compassion, consent, and consequences. Some people are moving toward narcissism and can be stopped in grade school when somebody helps them understand, this little girl has a right to say no, and you don't have a right to touch her when she says no. Educating children, for that matter, is one of the most powerful things we can do when we show them empathy ourselves. they start wanting to exhibit the same behaviors in their own lives. One of the most powerful people in my life was my 5th and 6th grade teacher. Not because she said or did anything. She didn't know about me being abused, but she kept telling me how much she loved me. And it made all the difference for me at a very dark time in my life. Educate potential abusers can also involve letting people know what kind of consequences their actions can have, even if they are already abusers. We have this solidarity wall out in front of the cafeteria right now, the student center, or whatever you call that thing here. When you realize this is what other people go through, it changes you. And we can tune in to one another. Educating about consent can be something you do when kids are 5 years old. You have a right to say no if your uncle wants to give you a hug or your grandma wants to give you a hug. You have to say no respectfully, but you can say no. Unless they start touching you in inappropriate ways, then you don't have to be respectful anymore. This is what my kids were taught. I recommend it to yours too. How do we heal the damage? This could be a whole day seminar, so we're not going to do that. You're welcome. But here's one of the most critical things. Believe alleged victims. I know that's an explosive topic, and the first thing that comes to people's minds is, what about false accusations? Yes, false accusations. They happen. They do. We all know, and not all women are saints, because the moment I say this, sometimes people are, they come out with their Facebook hammer. Yeah, but what about women can sin too, Thank you. I had no idea. I thought we were all saints. However, research consistently shows, I'm not making that up, that's a literal comment that somebody made to me. I'm like, thank you. So this conversation is obviously helpful. Research consistently shows 92 to 98% of the time, those who allege sexual abuse are telling the truth. When they're younger, it's actually even higher. It's more like 98 to 99% of the time when a young child comes forward and says, somebody touched me this way, they're telling the truth. There are people who are older who want to get even with their ex-boyfriend or trying to get custody or money or whatever. Those things happen. They're rare, but they do happen. So about 95% of the time, if you just believed the person who says, I was sexually assaulted by so-and-so, you'd get it right. Now, there is that 5%, and I am not saying that those 5% are meaningless. Those 5 out of 100 situations in which there's an innocent, we'll call it a man, being accused, those innocent people are every bit as valuable as the victims in the 95 other situations. Every one of those people is important. And we do not want to just assume, okay, it's true, we're going to destroy a good man's life because what are the other options? But if I had to choose, and we don't, if I had to choose doing the right thing 95% of the time or 5% of the time, guess which one I'd choose? I'd choose the 95. Now, we don't. We're not stuck in a position where we have to choose 95 or 5. But if I had to, that's what I do. So when I say believe alleged victims, that's what I mean. Careful investigation will usually eliminate false allegations. I dealt with the false allegation situation and had it fixed in 20 minutes. Another one took a few months, but they're rare. That's what I want you to know. They're rare, and when they do exist, usually if this guy has got a clean nose, he's not going to, if he's got a pattern of going and hanging out with girls late at night in suspicious places, I'm sorry, he may be innocent, but he might end up being that 1% that I can't tell on. And so in order to do what's best in the most situations, that guy might end up losing his reputation when he's a good, honest guy. So don't do that, guys. For your own sake, don't do stupid stuff. Is that complicated? Now, admittedly, some of you are going to be nurses or something, and you may be in situations where you are alone with somebody. Be careful. Do the best you can. We're not saying that false allegations don't happen. I'm saying they're rare. Careful investigation will usually also reveal what the false allegations are. So if we generally believe victims while also carefully investigating the allegations, we can respond appropriately about 99% of the time. Did I say believe all victims and assume that every guy who is accused is automatically guilty? Did anybody hear me say that? No. Thank you. Please do not go out there and quote me and say, she says always believe the person who comes forward. I said believe while you investigate. But what happens when you don't believe can be so traumatizing. Here's what not to say. I'm just going to assume the best. Judge not that you be not judged. Here's what they mean when they say, I'm just going to assume the best. I'm going to assume the best about him or the alleged perpetrator. Sometimes it's a woman. It is a woman sometimes. And I think that women, there's a very small percentage reported, I believe, that women are perpetrators more often than it's reported. Because women usually abuse boys, not always. And when they do, boys are more hesitant to come forward. So I believe women are represented in actual reports. But anyway, most of the time, I think we can all agree it's usually a guy. When we assume the best about the alleged perpetrator, we assume the worst about the alleged victim. That means we assume that she or he, the victim, is telling a lie. And until they prove it, we say, well, I'm just going to assume you're a liar. Even though I know 95% chance you're telling the truth, let's just assume for the sake of the situation that you're the liar. I think that's pretty unwise myself. Be careful not to fall into this trap because it's so attractive. And you'll see when somebody you love is accused, you want so much to believe this is just a bad dream. And you know what? It'll all go away if we can just somehow figure out that this didn't actually happen. That's a powerful motivation. But statistically, guys, you don't have to spend your lives lying awake at night going, what if somebody alleges something against me falsely? Put a window in your office door and don't worry about it because you're far more likely to be sexually assaulted than you are to actually be falsely accused of sexual assault. And you guys aren't going through your parking lot at night with all your keys between your fingers looking. You're not turning on your flashlight on the back of your phone and looking behind the seats in your car before you get in like people like I do. You're not living in constant terror that you're going to be sexually assaulted, most of you. Don't live in constant terror that you're going to be falsely accused either because it's very, very unlikely, particularly if you live a virtuous life. The reality is the one who has the most to lose is the one most likely to lie. If my two sons come to me and one of them says, he took a cookie out of the cookie jar, and my other son says, no, I didn't, who am I going to talk to a little bit more and find out? Who is most likely to be telling the truth there? The one who accused, because probably he didn't just make it up. Now, it depends on your kid, right? But I'm just saying. Depends on the cookie on that. Here's something else not to say. It's he said, she said. None of us knows what really happened, or I'm just going to leave it up to God, or it's not my business. These are all ways of inadvertently reinforcing the victim's sense that they are unloved and worthless. And far from it being an act of love for the perpetrator to let them off the hook when they actually might be guilty, it actually often emboldens them in sin and makes patterns into permanent fixtures in their lives when it could have been fixed if somebody had said, so, this woman says that you pinched her butt at work, okay? If somebody took that seriously and did something about it, and this guy was given the very strong message that that's not okay, 20 years down the road, he might not be a rapist. We can take steps to help people by giving them consequences. The Old Testament is full of stories where God showed love by giving justice instead of mercy. Justice and mercy together are the perfect character of God. And when we separate them and try to deal them out according to whatever we think or whatever we feel, we often mess up. One of the primary reasons that God destroyed Israel or sent them into captivity in Jeremiah was because they would not defend the vulnerable. There were two great sins in the Old Testament: idolatry and turning your back on the stranger, the widow, the orphan, the vulnerable. These are great, big sins in God's mind, and we need to pay attention seriously. How do we heal the damage? After believe alleged victims, the next one is protect victims by reporting whenever possible. Being protected helps restore victims' sense of being loved and valued. You see, when one person abuses, it makes the victim be tempted strongly to think, that's what God is like, particularly if this is a person placed by God in a place of spiritual authority over them, like a father or a pastor or an uncle or somebody like that. There's a very strong sense that that must be what God is like too. But when the church rises up, Or the other people within the family rise up and say, no, that is not what righteousness looks like. This is what righteousness looks like. That is when we restore the victim's picture of who God is, the victim's picture of what the world is like, how the universe runs, that there is justice behind everything. Now, not reporting if minors are involved may be a criminal offense. And also remember, consequences are an act of love when a person is doing something terrible. I don't spank my children. Well, I don't spank them at all anymore. They're old enough to write essays when they have problems. But I didn't spank them because I got mad at them. I would say, I'm so sorry you made that poor choice. Hold out your hand. Whack. Not because I was mean, not because I was mad, but because I wanted them to understand that when you do something wrong, it hurts. And this is redemptive. Appropriate action may prevent many more victimizations. Even if you can't change the mind of the predator, you can stop them from having access to many other people. And thirdly, how do we heal the damage? Support victims in the healing process. Listen without accusation. Help victims process their own mistakes separately from others' abuse. Don't accuse them of being the one who caused this to happen. But what did you say to make him that mad? Why did he do that to you anyway? Must have been what you were wearing. Reflect unconditional love. Show them what they're worth. Is there hope? Is there hope? Yes. Absolutely. I know this is a tough topic, and talking about it can be really difficult, and it can be overwhelming. I'm sure today is overwhelming for a lot of people here going, wow, I have so many things to process from my family, from people I know, from things that have happened to me. But here is hope. For defenders, don't be overwhelmed. You're only hopeless if you refuse to learn. Don't beat yourself up about the things that you've made mistakes about in the past. But move forward. For abusers, because it's possible that there's somebody here who has abused in the past. I talked to my friend, Kenny, on Sunday night. He called me from prison. I wear this because of Kenny. Kenny and I were in high school together. He was one of my best friends. Kenny is doing over 30 years in prison for molesting children now. He was the first guy I ever told that I'd been sexually abused, and it was because he came to me and he said, I heard you were crying in class when sexual abuse came up. Are you okay? It happened to me too. And if you need to talk to somebody, you can talk to my mom. Kenny cared. Kenny loved me. But Kenny didn't get any help dealing with his own demons. And as a result, when he was in his 40s, he finally fell into abusing children. After years of porn, he finally took the plunge. And when he did, he said, when the detective came to his house and said to him, it's judgment day, Kenny said, I took that as the voice of God. He confessed everything. And I said, Kenny, I'm talking this weekend to people about abuse. What should I tell them in case there's somebody there like you? He said, tell them, he who covers his sins will not prosper, but whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy. It's been 2 years now Kenny's been in prison. He's a different man now, a godly man. I respect him. I'm proud of him. He has never hidden what he did. He confessed everything to the detectives. They didn't have to do any investigative work because he told them everything he had done. If you have done something, confess it. Talk to your victims. Make it right. Do the best you can. And that's speaking from a man who was in prison for what he did. He still said, there are guys here who've been here 10 years and they still won't own it. They're still whining about, I shouldn't have had to, why do I, whatever. He said, no, tell them to tell the truth. Only the truth sets you free. And for those who are victims or survivors like myself, I want you to know he heals the broken in heart and binds up their wounds. That's a process. Binding up is a process, not an event. But it's a beautiful process. You know, I'm not who I would have been if sexual abuse hadn't happened to me. And there are times I have to admit, I'm like, you know, it would be nice. I'd trade all of this for a real childhood. But then I wouldn't, because abuse has changed who I am. I'm not the person I would have been, but I'm a stronger and better and wiser person, and I'm more equipped to help other people. And best of all, I have found faith in a God that I had to lean on. And that's been worth everything. So whatever your story is, whatever your journey is, I just encourage you, weave into it. You are deeply loved. You are deeply valued. The God of the universe has a plan for you, and people around you will value you too and reflect his character to you. Thank you.